Of all their evil actions, nothing defines the Nazis like the final solution: the murder of some 6 million Jews. But how did they get an entire nation to buy into the wholesale slaughter of an innocent race?
They're performing murder and terrible crimes, but at the same time trying to make it look as though it's correct.
This is the story of how Hitler and the Nazis groomed the German people.
He likened the Jews to a virus or a wound that won't heal.
Using all their darkest arts to make them complicit.
We do have partners in crime here.
In the worst genocide in human history. Of one thing, Hitler never makes any secret. He hates the Jews. Recovering from his wounds at the end of the First World War, he blames left-wing Jewish politicians for surrendering, stabbing Germany in the back. In the 1920s depression, he rails against a Jewish conspiracy, the root of all evil from communism to corrupt financiers.
This poisoning of the nation.
The German Jew is the enemy within.
He's an enemy in racial terms, in cultural terms, in national terms.
The Jews' greatest crime is that they pollute the pure genes of the Aryan master race. They must be eliminated.
The nation is no longer willing to be sucked dry by these parasites.
Everything he'd said since 1922 pointed towards the ultimate idea that you rid yourself of the Jews physically.
By 1941, he is master of everything. He has defeated France, captured Poland, and his army is advancing deep into the Soviet Union. Now he can begin on a lifetime's ambition to create a pure German nation free of Jews. But how can he carry the German people with him? He has always been aware his anti-Jewish policy is an acutely sensitive issue for ordinary citizens. In fact, during his first 4 years in power, Hitler barely mentions the Jews in public. And when he does move against them, it is slowly, step by step. They're banned from certain professions. Then they lose their rights as citizens and their livelihoods. Thousands are driven to flee abroad. During all of this, there are some objections. However, most Germans just stand and watch. But the actual killing, the elimination of all those who remain, their own neighbors, is still a step too far.
He recognized in the German people there was this residual sense of decency, which could be offended by horrific policies.
But killing Jews is indecent. It will take all the Nazis' skill to sell this to the German people. It's a task for Joseph Goebbels, the Nazis' master of persuasion. Goebbels shares the Führer's loathing of the Jews and is determined to convince his fellow Germans.
It was Goebbels who was responsible for selling the idea that the Jews were this kind of cancer or this plague at the heart of German society. He realized that if you could control what people consumed, then you could control them. And he was one of the first people to realize that.
Cinema is one of his favorite tools for manipulating public opinion. The film, The Eternal Jew, produced by Goebbels' propaganda unit, has a stark message. Wherever Jews settle, they behave like rats and parasites.
The film portrays the Jew as the eternal corrupter, specifically, of course, in the sense of Germanhood. The greatness of the German state will be destroyed if the enemy within, the eternal Jew, is allowed to go on performing his acts of destruction.
But when the film is released, it's a box office flop. It's a lesson for the Nazis. Persuading the German people to buy into this evil agenda is going to be a complex process. The danger lies in inflaming public opinion, and the risk of getting things wrong is already brutally clear. Since 1939, the Nazis have been carrying out a secret euthanasia campaign. It will become their dry run for how to commit mass murder without upsetting the German public. First, they need willing accomplices. Pliable nurses and doctors are instructed to single out terminally ill and disabled children. The next step is to deceive the people who might object. Parents are told their loved ones are to be sent to care centers for special treatment. And finally, they need a method of killing. Quiet and discreet. They choose murder by lethal injection. Some 5,000 innocent children are killed. Their only crime to be sick or disabled. The truth is hidden by false death certificates, blaming measles or pneumonia.
It's Hitler sort of kind of dipping his toe in the water with the German public to see what he can get away with.
Then the regime escalates the program, targeting tens of thousands of disabled adults in institutions across Germany. Ramping up the numbers involves more doctors, and some voice doubts about the legality of the policy. It's a problem that goes to the Führer himself.
And so Hitler wrote a note, which he rarely did, and signed, saying to the people in the chancellery concerned with the medical profession that this was now a policy that could be followed legitimately.
For the German doctors, it's now official. They are obeying the Führer's orders.
That's what the new culture is, they say to themselves. That's the environment. That's the classic road to hell.
A secret department, known as T4, is set up to mastermind the process. To kill so many, quickly and quietly, they need new techniques. What the men at T4 come up with is a shower room. Except these pipes and shower heads don't carry water. They deliver poisonous carbon monoxide gas.
In many ways, the euthanasia program represents the absolute bestiality of the Nazi regime.
Tens of thousands of Germany's sick and disabled are murdered in this way.
And it's an extraordinary program because all those involved knew what was going on. It's not as if they were blinded. They accept that euthanasia is a legitimate policy. The killing of Germans by Germans is legitimate.
But then the truth about the killing starts to leak out.
Gradually, of course, the public living close to those institutions began to get an awareness that something unusual was going on.
People start to worry. Other sick relatives might be the next victims.
The discussion starts here and there about, will this be applied to our wounded soldiers?
The Catholic Church picks up on the public fears and stands up to the regime.
famously, Bishop von Galen gave a sermon in which he denounced this program, not on the grounds that it is necessarily unethical to kill people, but on the grounds that these were Germans that were being killed. He emphasized that these were our brethren, members of our families.
The outcry becomes so strong, Hitler is forced to make a rare public climb down, officially halting his euthanasia campaign within Germany. The protest against euthanasia has taught the Nazis several lessons. First, if their racial policies threaten German families, public opinion won't wear it. Second, any further killing will have to be well hidden, far from Germany itself. And third, the Führer must not be associated with anything disreputable. These lessons will define how the Nazis deal with the Jews. In particular, Hitler will never personally sign a compromising document.
He didn't want his own name associated with the worst extremities of the anti-Jewish program.
2 years into the war, Hitler is riding high on the success of his campaign against the Soviet Union. He is content to leave the handling of the Jewish question to his loyal henchmen. Officially, Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring, Hitler's number 2, is in charge of Jewish affairs. But in fact, it will be Hitler's fanatical SS, selected for their devotion to the Nazi cause, who will deliver the final solution. Their leader is Heinrich Himmler, a Nazi Party member since the 1920s. He shares Hitler's resolve to rid Germany of the Jews. And his right-hand man, SS General Reinhard Heydrich, is even more terrifying.
He found in his subordinate, Reinhard Heydrich, absolutely the perfect man to carry out the destruction of a people.
As head of the Nazi security forces, Reinhard Heydrich is one of the most feared men in Germany.
If you gave Hitler a piece of paper and asked them to sketch out the perfect Nazi, I think he probably would have sketched out Reinhard Heydrich. He was tall, he was blonde, he was athletic.
He is a man of many talents. A champion fencer, a fighter pilot, a skilled violinist. But above all, he is a fanatical Nazi.
He had all the characteristics that made him the Aryan Superman. Heydrich really is the rising man of the Nazi racial killing machine.
Since 1939, Heydrich has been wreaking havoc in the conquered territories in the east. His secret death squads, the Einsatzgruppen, slaughter thousands of Polish Jews. Those who survive are rounded up into ghettos. Nearly 3 million await their fate in appalling conditions. Then Heydrich's SS thugs follow Germany's armies into the Soviet Union, continuing their murderous campaign against the Jews. News of Heydrich's massacres in the East begins to trickle back home to Germany.
Dear Hannah, last night 150 Jews were shot in this town. Men, women and children all bumped off. Don't worry about it. It has to be done. But don't tell anyone else.
Many thousands of Germans now know what is happening out east. But they do nothing. It confirms what the Nazis learnt from the euthanasia program. They can get away with killing Jews out of sight, far from home.
So this was something that was percolating outwards inside Nazi Germany. It was sort of, you know, the secret that would never dare to speak its name.
As Heydrich plots a far bigger attack on the Jews, he needs authority from above. He can't get it from Hitler, who wants to keep his involvement secret. So Heydrich turns to someone else and prepares one of the most important documents in the story of the final solution. He takes his secret letter to the home of Reich Marshal Hermann Goering. The man Hitler has officially put in charge of Nazi Jewish policy. What Heydrich wants is Goering's signature, authorizing him to produce a plan for the Nazis' intended final solution to the Jewish question. This is the stamp of approval he needs. But it will be another 5 months before Heydrich has his plan in place. Meanwhile, Hitler's armies are pushing deeper and deeper into the Soviet Union. Far from the eyes of the German people, Heydrich's killer squads are ramping up their slaughter of the Jews. They're looking for the most efficient method for mass murder. Still, just using bullets. Soon, Heydrich's SS develop a sinister routine. The Jews are rounded up and taken to a remote execution site. The first arrivals are forced to dig a pit. What happens next is revealed in this amateur film, shot in Latvia by a German soldier. A group of Jews is lined up in front of the mass grave and shot. Then another group is brought in, layer upon layer. The Nazis call it sardine packing.
Here we see a massive escalation of the policy of extermination of the Jews going on. In effect, we have now a Holocaust of Soviet Jews already taking place.
The worst slaughter takes place in the Ukraine, at the ravine known as Babi Yar. 33,000 are killed in just 2 days. As Heydrich ramps up the slaughter, he finds he doesn't have enough of his racist SS thugs. He needs new recruits.
There is some evidence that there was a bit more resistance to taking part in the killings than perhaps there would have been in the Einsatzgruppen, but this was by and large overcome, and it was done by the use of, for example, alcohol given out freely to these people that would anaesthetise them against the effects, if you like, of seeing large numbers of people killed in front of them.
But Heydrich knows this mass killing is still taking its toll on his men.
Most of these men rapidly became horribly troubled and disturbed, and it's very largely this experience which pushes Himmler and Heydrich to look for other ways of killing huge numbers of people.
Back home, Hitler is still looking for a way to deal with the 200,000 Jews living in Germany.
Everybody knew Jews. They were part of German society. They were Germans. They had fought in the First World War. They had won Iron Crosses.
So, Goebbels' propaganda machine has to be mobilized to create a sense of difference, to set them apart from their pure-blood German neighbors. Stage 1. Give them a star.
A Jewish German and a non-Jewish German may not look that different, but what you can do is label them with a star. And it's the yellow star is absolutely key to differentiating them, and it starts kind of staining them.
Anyone above the age of 6 is obliged to wear the yellow Star of David.
This is the real moment at which they really say to the people on the streets, these people are different from everybody else. They're not German, they are Jewish, and the Jews are an unwanted race in our Third Reich.
Stage 2 is to make sure Germans do not socialize with Jews, to keep them physically apart.
Don't be fooled into thinking, he's nice because I know him. He's a Jew, they're Jews, and therefore they're a threat.
Goebbels keeps up a stream of propaganda, carrying the insidious message that it's not the Nazis who are turning on the Jews. The Jews have brought this misery on themselves. For one of his slogans of the week, he uses a quote from Hitler.
If the international Jewish financiers should succeed in plunging the nations once more into a world war, then the result will not be the victory of Jewry, but the annihilation of the Jewish race in Europe.
It is a masterful piece of propaganda. It absolves the German people of any guilt. The Jews will be responsible for their own destruction.
The single most disturbing thing that Goebbels achieved, that was scapegoating. He was polluting the mind of a nation.
Slowly but surely, the Nazis are grooming German citizens to accept the removal of the 200,000 Jews still living as their neighbors. However, even now, they are wary of inflaming domestic public opinion.
The hard line is softened for public consumption so that people who are already been trained to be anti-Jewish are not pushed too far.
The man in charge, SS General Reinhard Heydrich, begins a campaign of deception. The official line is that the Jews are to be resettled in the East.
Heydrich, of course, realises that what you can't just say publicly is, right, we're going to kill 6 million people tomorrow morning. You've got to do a bit more subtly than that. And, when you're talking about evacuating people to the east, you've got to make it look as though they really are just being evacuated to the east.
So, Heydrich sets up a model camp at Theresienstadt in the occupied Czech territory. Newsreels are released showing it as a safe place where German Jews can resettle.
And it was provided with facilities that many ordinary Germans didn't have. Swimming pools, complex of cinemas, massage areas. The idea being that although we've removed the Jew from our midst, we're not making him suffer because we're giving him a way of life which is perfectly consistent with civilized standards.
It's a cruel deceit. For most Jews, Theresienstadt is really just a stop before they are sent on their way to the horrific ghettos in occupied Poland and around the Baltic.
And that's one of the kind of terrifying elements of the Nazi regime, is they're performing murder and terrible crimes, but at the same time trying to make it look as though it's correct.
But Heydrich's deportation of the German Jews creates a new problem. Out in the east, the ghettos are already crammed full. Because of the overcrowding, local Nazi leaders in the occupied territories start to kill Jews to make space for the newcomers. This almost leads to a public relations disaster. In late 1941, 1,000 German Jews are dispatched east to the model camp at Theresienstadt. And these aren't just any Jews. Many of them are elderly war heroes, holders of the Iron Cross. Then there's an error. they're sent to a ghetto in Latvia, where Jews are being massacred.
But because of a mix-up in the administration of it, they end up in Riga, and most of them are shot.
It's a catastrophic error. If the news leaks out, the German people would be appalled. It's a warning to Heydrich and SS chief Heinrich Himmler. Killing German Jews needs their close control. By now, their plans for the SS to deliver the final solution are ready. An elegant lakeside villa in the Berlin suburb of Wannsee is the venue for a top-secret meeting. High-ranking civil servants, the men who run the German state, Nazi party officials, and members of the Reich security forces assemble for one of the most notorious gatherings in history.
In this quiet, palatial atmosphere, all of the stakeholders who will decide the fate of European Jews are assembled.
Awaiting them will be Adolf Eichmann, chief organizer of Jewish deportation. He is to become a key player in the Nazis' final solution.
Eichmann was a virulent anti-Semite. He was a very passionate man in many ways. He was a drunkard. He had affairs. He was a very committed Nazi. And he really felt that what he was doing was absolutely right. And he wasn't just doing it because he was a boring civil servant. He was doing it because he wanted to kill Jews.
His role today is to keep the minutes of the meeting. The mood is relaxed, despite the sinister agenda. Eichmann's superior, Heydrich, is in the chair. First, Heydrich makes it clear his authority comes from the very top, via Goering, Hitler's number 2. And what he is putting forward is an SS-run operation.
What Heydrich had to do was to establish that what he was doing or proposing at Wannsee was in fact the Führer's policy.
The meeting is so sensitive, the only reference to the Nazis' real plan is in the careful language of Eichmann's minutes.
The Jews already under German control will be put to work in the east. The majority will die. Those that survive will have to be dealt with appropriately.
Dealt with appropriately is code for what we know as the final solution. The plan is to kill all of the 11 million Jews in Europe. It is genocide. This is a task too big for Heydrich's death squads. It will require murder on an industrial scale.
What Heydrich brought to the table was an incredibly analytical mind, a very, very cold, callous, evil way of thinking that could just regard genocide as a kind of challenge for a civil servant.
Heydrich needs the men around him to mobilize Germany's resources and infrastructure. They will have to be involved in this crime.
Wannsee is the coming together in administration terms of all the leading authorities concerned with transport, with gathering of the Jews, with treatment of them when they're there, the food supplies, etc. That's a logistical problem that's got to be resolved by logistical means.
To Heydrich's relief, there is no dissent. In just over an hour, Heydrich has the agreement he wants. The German state will be mobilized, and the SS are in charge of the final solution. Now it's just a question of practicalities. In the remote area of eastern Poland, there are huge swathes of deep, dark forest.
If you want to get rid of a people, that's the place to do it. This is a place where people can just disappear.
The SS already has a base here, in the city of Lublin. They have rounded up thousands of Jews into labor camps and ghettos. They must now be discreetly killed. Heydrich has already been experimenting on the best way to do it. He's brought in his top expert in mass murder.
One of the most unpleasant of a very unpleasant bunch called Nazis was a fellow called Christian Wirth. He's involved in the euthanasia program. He designs the death rooms, and he uses his knowledge and experience to apply it to extermination of Jews. And he was the one that said, you can't destroy Jews piecemeal, as we did in the euthanasia program. We need 1,000 a day, 2,000 a day. See this as a major logistical problem.
On his way to Lublin, Wirth does some research. At the town of Helmno, they are already experimenting on how to kill Polish Jews. First, they are led into a sealed chamber, unaware they are entering the back of a large truck. Exhaust fumes are pumped in, and the victims soon die of carbon monoxide poisoning. But killing one truckload of 50 Jews at a time is not going to deliver the final solution. Wirth's orders are for mass murder hidden away in Poland's dense forests. He needs a more efficient, continuous process to kill the numbers required. So, at his first location, near the remote village of Belzec, Wirth installs a static combustion engine to pump exhaust fumes into large, sealed gas chambers. Belzec becomes a blueprint for other secret death camps, Sobibor and Treblinka. With Helmno, they form a lethal network of extermination, all carefully chosen because they are close to the railway lines. The Nazis now carry out the first stage of their plan. They liquidate the ghettos. Some 1.5 million Jews are shipped to these camps, crammed into cattle trucks and goods wagons, brought in like cargo, to be eliminated swiftly and out of sight. Unlike the vast concentration camps in Germany, which were prisons, these death factories take up just a small clearing.
These forests are places where evil happens, and the Nazis chose a spot that almost feels evil before what they did there took place. It is quite the most terrifying spot, and it's not just terrifying because what we now know that happened there. It's terrifying because it's remote, it's dark, it's lonely, and it's sort of a place that just gives you a sense of absolute hopelessness.
Hidden from German eyes, the rounding up of Polish Jews is a brutal affair. A very different challenge is how to round up German Jews and send them to the death camps. The man in charge of this problem is Heydrich's killer bureaucrat, Adolf Eichmann. He is the mastermind of the deportation program.
The Holocaust, the destruction of the Jews, was a bureaucratic process. And to run a bureaucratic process, you need bureaucrats. Adolf Eichmann is the archetypal bureaucrat. Functioning in an administrative sense is the key to success of any policy. It's got to be programmed.
The issue facing Eichmann is how to get rid of these Jews without upsetting their neighbors, without ordinary Germans finding out what is really going on. The answer is the familiar Nazi tactic: deception. People are told that the Jews are being resettled, sent to a safe destination. At the railway stations, they won't see any sinister cattle trucks. The Jews leave on comfortable passenger trains with tickets, food, and money for the journey. And this deception seems to work on Germans and Jews.
This is probably the most amazing part of the process, that it seems to all go on in a kind of matter-of-fact way. We don't see any massive riots at the German collecting points. They do assemble, thinking that, you know, resettlement in the East might actually be better than walking around a German street by now and being abused. Their civil rights have been taken away, their dignity have been taken away, their property have been taken away. Many of them thought things might actually get better. They'd accepted they had no place in Germany, and maybe, hey, things in Poland could be no worse than what they are.
The Jews will not discover the truth about their final destination until they are far from German soil. The Nazis continue their deception to the bitter end. The commandant of Treblinka death camp orders the construction of a fake railway station, complete with painted wooden clock. Its hands always fixed at 6 o'clock. Just enough to reassure the new arrivals. But this stop will be their last. Convinced they are to have a shower for health reasons, men and women are separated and remove their clothes. Their hair and beards are shorn off. Then, suddenly, they are rushed into the tube, a narrow corridor lined with barbed wire. A dark chamber looms, but it is too late. The journey from train to death takes just 90 minutes. The Nazis are now operating such an efficient system, nothing can stop it. Not even when Reinhard Heydrich, the chief architect of the final solution, falls victim to an assassination attempt.
At his funeral, the biggest sort of Nazi showpiece funeral of the entire period, all the Nazis are there, and Hitler seems to even be shedding a few tears at losing this sort of right-hand Aryan Superman.
In Heydrich's honor, his boss, SS Chief Heinrich Himmler, names the death camp project Action Reinhardt and vows to step up the slaughter in Poland. In the forests of eastern Poland, the Nazis are carrying out their final solution to the Jewish question. It is genocide. At the end of 1942, Adolf Eichmann, the Nazis' killer bureaucrat, receives detailed reports from the secret Polish death camps. Over 1 million Jews have already been killed. Hitler's vision is being fulfilled.
There was a time when the Jews in Germany laughed at my prophecies, but take my word for it, they will stop laughing everywhere.
Following the Nazis' master plan, the Jews are being worked to death or murdered outright. Out in Poland, the Nazis are less discreet in their killing. The Majdanek concentration camp, built on a hill in full view of the city of Lublin, was originally intended to house Soviet prisoners of war. Under SS control, it becomes another grim destination for tens of thousands of Polish Jews, shipped in as forced laborers. Living in the most brutal conditions, many of them will die from sickness and exhaustion. As a key part of the Nazis' final solution, the camp is equipped with facilities for extermination. Poisonous carbon monoxide is used in the gas chambers, and a crematorium is installed, with ovens to burn thousands of bodies.
Death camps, slave labour camps, extermination camps. It's hard to divine which is which at some points. All we know is people are dying. They're dying through a number of ways. Starvation, some are being gassed, some are being systematically killed, some are being beaten to death.
200 miles to the west, one of the largest Polish work camps is transformed into the Nazis' most notorious killing machine. And it is here, at Auschwitz-Birkenau, that the mass murder of the final solution will reach a truly barbaric level. Alongside a vast industrial complex, Himmler orders the construction of gas chambers and crematoria capable of slaughtering up to 6,000 people every day. And the Nazis now have a new technique for murder, a chemical designed to kill pests. Zyklon B is a cyanide-based substance. In a warm, moist atmosphere, it turns from pellets into a highly toxic gas.
The death cells were constructed with either pipes into them at high level or holes in the roof through which the pellets could be dropped.
The killer pesticide is soon being used by the Nazis on a massive scale.
They are moving here into absolutely new territory. Nobody in history has attempted to do something like this before, so they are literally finding their way.
Manufacturing Zyklon B boosts the profits of Germany's chemical industry.
The complicity of the great manufacturing chemical companies is obvious. They later at Nuremberg and afterwards said, we didn't know what it's being used for. Why would you need Zyklon B on that scale of production if it wasn't against people?
By this stage, many more Germans are becoming aware of what is happening to the Jews.
There's one amazing incident where a freight train was going towards Auschwitz, and one of the survivors said that he was in this freight train. And he said that at one of the train stations, at a German station, somebody shouted, "We know where you're going, to the gas chambers." So you can see that in these little towns even people knew what was happening. So I imagine in that particular freight train then, there was a certain amount of trepidation.
To help finance his evil plans, Himmler turns the final solution into a commercial partnership between the SS and Germany's corporate giants. The SS make a fortune leasing out their Jewish prisoners, men, women and children, to work in IG Farben's factories.
We can actually see that in the killing process, we do have partners in crime here. Not just the Nazis, but also here a massive capitalist enterprise that enters into this project with the Nazis and actually finances it.
And it's not just big business that's implicated in genocide. Thousands of ordinary Germans are making their own contribution.
So you've got the train driver driving a trainload of Jews across Europe. He knows what's going on, but he's not asking any questions. You've got the civil servant working in some small department in Berlin who's probably responsible for supplying the cattle trucks for a certain shipment of Jews. He's just following orders. But what you've got are a lot of very small cogs, each of whom think, well, I'm not really taking part in this, I'm just doing a small thing. But when you put all those cogs together, then you've got a murder machine. But when you take it apart, each of those cogs can say, it wasn't me.
With this complicity of silence, no German needs to speak openly about the final solution. No one needs to take responsibility. And all of this seems to happen with barely a flicker of protest back home. By 1943, Himmler is able to declare that Germany itself is almost Judenrein, Jew-free. The only resistance comes in one celebrated event. when the Nazis try to deport a group of Jews married to German women.
Famous occasion known as the Rosenstrasse affair, where a number of Jewish men had been rounded up. Their non-Jewish wives came together and protested en masse outside Nazi officials' houses and buildings. Such was their determination that threats to them to disperse went unheeded.
When the protests become public, it causes real consternation at the highest levels. Even now, the Nazis are scared of admitting what is really going on.
And the Nazi officials eventually came to the conclusion, far better to give way than to try and face them down. And the husbands were allowed to go back to the wives.
They even reprieve 35 Jews who had already been sent to Auschwitz. But the Rosenstrasse protest is an isolated occasion. By now, the vast majority of Germans have other things to worry about. They are starting to lose the war, and their first concern is their own families.
They were being, bombed round the clock by the British and the Americans. They had huge food shortages. Their own children were dying in droves on the Eastern Front. I think there was very little capacity within many people's minds to actually really care about what was happening to some Jews.
For Heinrich Himmler, the final solution represents a hideous triumph. A recording exists of his speech to a secret meeting of SS leaders. He is openly proud.
This is a page of glory, never mentioned and never to be mentioned.
This admission that we can't be acknowledged as heroes in the public eye is a sure sign that what they've done would be unacceptable.
By now, they have killed some 4 million Jews since the start of the war. Another 2 million will be murdered before it is over. But the Germans must feel no guilt. Himmler shifts the blame onto the Jews. They are responsible for their annihilation.
We have the moral right. We had the duty to our people to do it, to kill this people who wanted to kill us.
And so the German people become complicit in one of the worst crimes in history. Hitler's control over Germany is built on a simple illusion. People believe the Führer is an all-wise genius, leading them in a noble enterprise. But now the reality is breaking through. Germany is losing the war. Appalling atrocities are being committed. And Hitler is increasingly out of touch.
It's a man who's breaking down, physically and mentally.
As some Germans learn the truth, they start to plot against the regime.
If you're caught, you know fully well that you're going to end up having your head chopped off or strung up by piano wire.
This is the story of how the Nazi illusion starts to crack. And Hitler will do anything to cling to power. By the winter of 1943, it's all going wrong for Adolf Hitler. After the defeat at Stalingrad, Hitler's army is suffering disaster after disaster. In Italy, his closest ally, Mussolini, the fascist dictator, has been overthrown. In the West, the threat of a massive Allied invasion is growing daily. Germany itself is now a target. Relentless bombing raids leave thousands homeless.
These are people who for 12 years have been told the Führer can do no wrong. Germany cannot err under him, almost an infallibility about it.
The public image of an all-conquering military genius is no longer believable. What the German people don't know is that their beloved Führer is falling apart.
He's living on a cocktail of drugs. He's taking strychnine, which his doctor prepares for him. He sleeps less than 3 hours a night. He's seeing cocaine having injected to keep him going.
He's now secretly cracking up. Out of contact with his people, he spends all his time at his remote headquarters in the East, trying to turn around the course of the war. All this presents a real problem for the Nazis' master of spin, Joseph Goebbels. Since the beginning, he has been the architect of the key to Nazi success, the presentation of the Führer's image as the all-wise statesman. To keep in touch with what's being said about Hitler in the bars and cafes across Germany, he uses thousands of spies to eavesdrop on people's conversations.
Goebbels was a pioneer in terms of research. Polling public opinion to shape your messaging is clearly one of the most powerful elements of anybody generating power now.
The latest reports make disturbing reading for Goebbels. Many Germans are starting to feel that Hitler is out of touch with their daily suffering.
He has withdrawn from public appearance. His broadcasts are very few and far between.
There is a risk that the German people are losing faith in their leader.
And that's what Goebbels says to him, that, mein Führer, we need leadership. Greatness can't just exist in a vacuum. It's got to be expressed somehow.
Keen to turn the situation around, Goebbels resorts to the power of mass media to rally support for the Führer. In April, he has the perfect opportunity: Hitler's 55th birthday.
In Nazi folklore, Hitler's birthday was a very special day. And so in 1944, Goebbels was very keen that the tradition of a great celebration should be continued.
He makes sure the newsreels carry the story across Germany. The message is that even when their cities are being bombed and their houses collapse, the German people will stand firm alongside their Führer.
They were going through a hard time. Bombing was almost a daily or nightly affair. How do you survive that? How do you sustain yourself? Belief and hope. And that's what the message is meant to convey. We will come through.
Goebbels' propaganda even makes a virtue out of Hitler spending so much time with his generals. The Führer's duty, he says, is to win the war for the German nation. It may mean he has less time for the people, but they owe him their loyalty because he is fighting tirelessly for them. But both Goebbels and Hitler are unaware he is already fatally out of touch with one section of his people, vital to the Nazis' survival: the army. The biggest danger to the Nazi regime is brewing out on the front line amongst middle-ranking officers. These are the people who see the gulf between Hitler's claims as a leader and the reality in the field.
The colonels, the middle-ranking, middle management of the army, they were the people who were actually out on the ground realising what he'd got them into.
They have to follow Hitler's increasingly bizarre orders, from his total ban on any German retreat.
Absurd strategically, absurd militarily, as his generals knew.
To his reckless demands for offensives without adequate troops or equipment. Among those who've experienced this chaos is Lieutenant Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg. A war hero, he has lost an eye and a hand in battle. As a soldier and an aristocrat, he is outraged by Hitler's military incompetence.
When the war goes wrong from 42, really post Stalingrad, one can understand why the Stauffenbergs of this world found Hitler increasingly impossible to accept.
As a staunch Catholic, Stauffenberg is also horrified by the Nazis' treatment of the Jews. With the Führer in charge, he believes his beloved Germany is heading for disaster. It could soon be wiped off the map by its enemies. Stauffenberg's treasonous views are shared by fellow officer Colonel Henning von Tresckow. He too is appalled by the evil reality the Nazis are trying to hide. The slaughter of thousands of civilians in Poland and the Soviet Union.
He finds it hard to reconcile that with his sense of being a soldier and being a decent German.
These men are the first to realize the sick nature of the regime beneath the public gloss. They're desperate to save Germany and salvage its military honor. But they can't do it with the Führer in charge. They have only one option: to kill Hitler.
The risks are immense, because if you're caught, you know fully well that you're going to end up having your head chopped off or strung up by piano wire. Hitler has some of the most sophisticated personal security. He changes his itinerary often. He has very trusted SS men surrounding him who guard him.
Von Tresckow is undeterred. He sets up several attempts on Hitler's life.
Hitler has the luck of the devil. He changes his itinerary at the last minute, so someone who's about to shoot him, misses his chance. Bombs are placed near him, but they don't go off.
Increasingly, von Tresckow realizes killing Hitler is not enough. To defeat the Nazis utterly, he needs to decapitate the entire Reich. He has to mount a coup d'etat.
He has a real sense of history and the importance, the historical importance of what they're doing. And he says this on a number of occasions. There's one famous quote where he says that the stain of Nazism will affect us all, for generations to come. And he says it will not be Hitler who is blamed only. It will be you and me, it will be your wife and my children and your children. And he sees that with absolute clarity.
Meanwhile, the regime that prides itself on being loved by its people has no idea that someone is plotting its downfall. Adolf Hitler is increasingly out of touch with his people. He spends weeks in his remote headquarters, the Wolf's Lair, trying to turn around a war that cannot be won. He doesn't see the signs of discontent that are stirring. Two army officers, Klaus von Stauffenberg and Henning von Treschow are sickened by the horrors being carried out in the name of the German people. So they're plotting to overthrow the regime.
It wasn't enough for them simply to kill the head of state and then let chaos reign. They had to have some contingency plan to take power. They could then negotiate with Germany's enemies.
The solution they come up with is astonishing. They will get the Nazi state to overthrow itself. They will hijack Operation Valkyrie. Operation Valkyrie is the Nazis' top-secret plan to crush any uprising within Germany. At this stage, the Nazis see the biggest threat coming from the millions of foreign slave laborers they have shipped in to boost Germany's war effort. Living in appalling conditions and deeply resentful, they are a potential enemy within.
Valkyrie starts with the idea we have to do something that prevents the problems within from growing to such an extent they become a threat to the state itself.
Any workers' uprising would trigger Operation Valkyrie, mobilizing troops from the Nazis' reserve army, controlled from Berlin. These are regular fighting units based in Germany as reinforcements for the front line. If Valkyrie is launched, their role is to seize key control centers and suppress any internal uprising. By a stroke of luck for the conspirators, the man put in charge of the Valkyrie plans is none other than Colonel von Stauffenberg. Secretly, he and his fellow plotter Henning von Treschow decide to modify the orders.
They realized that this was a plan that could be tweaked and subverted to actually serve the purposes of the plotters.
Their changes to the Valkyrie orders need to be discreetly typed up without anyone being able to trace who made them. Von Treschow's wife joins the plotters. They know there is one force in particular they will have to deal with. The SS, the elite troops fanatically loyal to Hitler and the Nazi regime. So, alongside the original orders to suppress any uprising of foreign workers, the plotters secretly add the SS as a potential threat to Germany. They too will now be neutralized by the reserve army. Their plan needs one final element, an excuse to launch Valkyrie. Rather than wait for a workers' uprising, they add their own trigger. The assassination of the Führer. The plotters now have a plan ready to seize power. What they have to do next is find a way to kill Hitler. The key problem is how to gain access to him and his inner circle.
Hitler appears very rarely in public and never gives his details of movement, so you couldn't plan to assassinate him in the open. It's just not on. It has to be done, really, at some military gathering.
As the plotters ponder this challenge, a long-awaited event adds urgency to their plans. D-Day. The Allied invasion in the West is finally launched. As the scale of the invasion becomes clear, the German commanders are desperate to unleash a counterattack using their panzer divisions. But for that, they need the permission of their supreme commander, Adolf Hitler.
It's remarkable that he has that degree of control over the military. They couldn't act on their own.
But the supreme commander is hundreds of miles away at his mountain retreat in Bavaria. He's been celebrating the wedding of the sister of his companion, Eva Braun. Now he is sleeping it off. And he's given orders not to be woken before noon. So, while the panzers wait for the Führer, valuable hours are lost, allowing the Allies to secure their beachheads in Normandy. And very soon, there's more bad news. In the east, the Soviets launch a devastating offensive. 2 million troops tear through the German lines, inflicting some 500,000 casualties. There's a real danger Germany itself could soon be overrun and destroyed completely.
This gives an added urgency to the plotters to make a final effort to salvage something from the wreckage of Nazi Germany.
Among those out east trying to stop the Soviet advance is Henning von Tresckow. He calls on his fellow plotters to act.
What matters now is to prove to the world and for the records of history that the men of the resistance movement dared to take the decisive step.
The next move is now up to Colonel von Stauffenberg. And in the midst of these dramatic events, he is summoned to Hitler's residence in the Alps. He has been given the task of briefing him on Operation Valkyrie, the regime's secret internal security plans. The invitation to see Hitler in Bavaria is a breakthrough for the plotters. They now have access to the heart of the Nazi regime.
And the first meeting that he has with Hitler is actually on the 7th of June 1944, which is the day after D-Day. He shook hands with Stauffenberg and sort of held his gaze for a while, as he tended to do, which was his way of sort of testing somebody out to see what their mettle was like.
Hitler senses no threat and welcomes him in. Now, Stauffenberg has what he wants, regular access to the Führer.
He couldn't have hoped for better, in terms of, if I'm going to get at the man, I've got to be physically close to him. And here's the chance.
By early July, Stauffenberg is ready to assassinate the Führer and so trigger Valkyrie. He decides to use one of his now regular meetings with Hitler to make his move. But for the conspirators' plan to work, they don't just want the Führer. They need to take out as many high-ranking Nazis as possible. So Stauffenberg delays, waiting for a time he can catch them all together. A week later, he thinks he has that moment. He has been summoned back to Hitler's residence in Bavaria. But when he gets there, Himmler, the head of the SS, is absent. Stauffenberg aborts the mission. 4 days later, he has another chance. Hitler is now at the Wolf's Lair, his remote headquarters in the east.
It was an enormous installation, something like 200 buildings. It had 3 concentric rings of security. Each one had to have a specific type of pass to get through. So security was absolutely as tight as was possible. And for anyone going in there, it would be quite a daunting experience. You're going into the very inner sanctum of the Third Reich.
Again, key members of the Nazis' inner circle are absent. Stauffenberg aborts the mission once more. With the Allies closing in, time is now running out for the conspirators. They must strike soon.
What's crucial for the progress of the plot is the idea that Hitler has been killed. This is thought it's almost like a magic spell that people imagined that if Hitler was thought to be dead, that then not only the sense of personal loyalty that many soldiers had to him would be considered to have lapsed, but also there's almost like Hitler had such a presence that once that had gone, that people could perhaps think more freely.
The plotters have been secretly building a small network of like-minded collaborators, ready to make their move once Hitler is gone. But the wider the circle grows, the greater the risk that someone will betray them before they can strike. After several abortive attempts, Stauffenberg decides it is now or never. He flies from Berlin to Hitler's remote headquarters in the east, the Wolf's Lair. He is accompanied by his adjutant, who will help him prepare the bomb.
Let's not forget, you are right at the heart of power in Nazi Germany, and you're about to kill Adolf Hitler, who is regarded as a saint still by so many people. This is a huge event, and you could just imagine what's going through his head.
First, he finds a room in one of the outer buildings where they can set the fuse. It contains a glass vial of acid and a spring-loaded detonator. One twist releases the acid. It gives him just over 10 minutes to plant the bomb and get away. He now sets off for Hitler's briefing room.
The sheer stress of trying to carry out that assassination, it was something you only did once. And yet Stauffenberg had already carried his bomb into a number of meetings with Hitler, and he'd already been down that road a number of times. So you can only imagine what degree of stress he must have been under.
Neither Himmler nor Goering is there, but he decides there is no way back.
Briefcase gets put down, it's basically a ticking bomb. Hitler is surely going to die.
Stauffenberg makes the excuse he has to take a phone call and leaves. Convinced the deed is done, Stauffenberg rushes back to Berlin to launch the coup against the Nazis. But what he doesn't know is that Hitler survives. When the news reaches Berlin, the coup swiftly unravels. 4 of the ringleaders, including Klaus von Stauffenberg, are immediately executed.
Only Stauffenberg made any comment as he was about to be shot. He cried out, "Long live Holy Germany," and those were his last words.
Out on the Eastern Front, von Tresckow hears that the plotters failed and commits suicide.
He was subsequently given a hero's funeral as a great colonel on the Eastern Front. But in time, his role inevitably, and as he predicted, his role in the wider plot is uncovered, and his corpse is actually exhumed and cremated in Sachsenhausen concentration camp.
Hitler may have survived, but this is still a real crisis for the Nazis. Their entire regime is built on the idea that the German people adore him. So how do you explain it when the people who should be the most loyal to him, the military, try to kill him? This is the new challenge that lands on the desk of propaganda chief Joseph Goebbels. The solution he adopts is the tried and tested tactic that has brought the Nazis so much success in the past. In public, he will continue to project the image of the Führer as the popular, caring statesman. He is filmed looking fit and well, visiting those wounded by the bomb. He's had a lucky escape. 4 of his men have died. Goebbels says his survival is another sign of his great destiny.
The providential hand of fate upon his shoulder, he has come through. Even his closest people can't bring him down. Why has he survived? To lead Germany to victory.
Goebbels' next step is to downplay the conspiracy. He advises Hitler to go on air, to make it clear the plotters don't represent ordinary German people.
This is a crime without parallel in German history. A plot forged by a tiny clique of ambitious, criminal, stupid officers.
The message is that the Führer is still popular. Just a tiny fringe is against him.
He rejects his would-be assassins as a group of adventurers, a military clique trying to take power. So what Hitler is doing is appealing over their heads to the people and saying, I have survived, I am still here, I'm still with you.
To ram his message home, Hitler promises vengeance.
This tiny gang of criminals will be mercilessly eradicated.
This is the Nazis' next move, a campaign of terror. The man in charge is Heinrich Himmler, overall head of the security services. He unleashes the SS and the Gestapo. 7,000 people are arrested throughout Germany. The crackdown makes it clear to anyone thinking subversive thoughts what might happen to them.
It justifies increasing severity, increasing surveillance, increasing brutality.
Himmler even targets their wives and children. Many are dispatched to concentration camps.
The brutality of the Gestapo and the SS isn't accidental. It's programmed into the whole machinery of Nazi rule. You have to be brutal to those who can or do represent a potential threat.
To cap it all, they are going to put the plotters into a public show trial.
It would have been very easy simply for the conspirators, or the suspected conspirators, just to have disappeared, in the Nazi phrase, into night and fog, ultimately there to get a bullet in the back of their heads in a concentration camp. But what Hitler wanted to do was to put these people on trial, or some of them on trial, and so they went to these things called the People's Court.
Hitler's aim is to have the conspirators publicly humiliated. They are brought before the court, stripped of any military dignity.
And one of the most sort of raving, demonic judges associated with these courts was a man called Roland Freisler, who would literally scream and shout at the accused. I mean, this was not impartial justice. He would scream and shout at the accused. I mean, sometimes so loud that those actually recording these so-called trials for posterity would actually ask him to keep his volume down for the sake of the microphones.
Goebbels makes sure that the journalists report every humiliating encounter. There can be no doubt what happens to those who betray the Reich.
This is not a judge. This is simply an executioner in a robe.
Some 5,000 are condemned to be executed. Hitler says he wants them hung up like meat carcasses. Some executions are even filmed and sent back for Hitler and the SS to watch.
The regime also moved quite quickly to shore up its authority amongst the military. So, for example, the Hitler greeting, which wasn't until that point required, became required of all military personnel after the 20th of July. And all Wehrmacht personnel, right from field marshals down to the lowliest private, were required yet again to personally declare their loyalty to Adolf Hitler.
The Nazi Party's strategy, fierce repression and an aggrieved sense of betrayal, seems to work. Goebbels' reports from the secret police reveal an upsurge of support for the Führer.
And people said, what criminals are they that can bring down the Führer? The general feeling, as recorded, is that although people might have been unhappy with the war, the way it was going, and Hitler's role, the idea that somebody tried to destroy the Führer, kill the Führer in this way, that does quieten quite a few sceptical voices that were being heard prior to that.
But the regime does face one particular public relations challenge. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel is a hero to the German people and one of Hitler's favorite commanders. But in the interrogations, his name is mentioned as one of those involved in the conspiracy.
Rommel certainly seems to have been approached by the plotters and seems to have been sounded out. And there's, I think, convincing evidence that he would have signed up to the idea of Hitler being removed, but he certainly wouldn't have countenanced an assassination. That, I think, is a step too far. That would not have been something that he would have considered acceptable or desirable. So some sort of change at the top to rationalise the German military effort would be something that he potentially might have been amenable to.
However deep his involvement, Rommel is now a problem for the Nazis.
Rommel's association with the conspiracy is a really tricky one for the Nazis to play out. If he's against the Nazis, well then frankly, who shouldn't be? If he is put on trial, a massive hero like that is going to be a really bad PR disaster.
But once his name comes up, the regime has to act. Himmler's solution is brutal, but it must be made to look respectable. Two months after the assassination attempt, Rommel is at home, recovering from injuries suffered in an Allied air attack.
One day, two officers turn up at his home. And they come into the house and they have this very brief conversation in which his options are given to him. He's either going to kill himself and his family will be safe, or he will have to be put on trial.
Faced with this appalling choice, he takes the only option he can as a husband and father. He does what the regime wants. He takes the poison and commits suicide. The official line is that Rommel died from his war injuries. Hitler cynically orders a grand military funeral for his popular hero. He even sends flowers to Rommel's wife. But the family know the bitter truth.
It captures very nicely the idea of kind of what's going on in private in the Nazi regime and what's going on in public in the Nazi regime. In the private world, you've got basically all this hostility, all these undercurrents of treachery, both against the regime and by the regime against their own generals, and yet in public, everything seems hunky-dory. You've got state funerals of Rommel, swastikas on the coffin, honour guards, public eulogies in praise of him.
But only the illusion of normality has been restored. Germany is still losing the war, and people are still losing faith in the Führer. Goebbels needs to pull the nation together once more behind Adolf Hitler. So he repeats the call he made a year earlier for total war. Everyone, men, women, and children, are to be mobilized to save Germany.
Some people claim the German nation is resisting the government's total war measures. The Germans don't want total war, say the English. They want capitulation. So do you want total war?
He said we need to go back to the party and to the people. I think we can see the practical outcome of this in the calling up of young boys and older men for military service.
But in reality, it's an act of desperation.
These young lads and these older men had few modern weapons. The old men had military training, the young boys didn't. They clearly were, to any rational mind, were not going to be a match for well-equipped American or Soviet or British troops. But Goebbels invested a kind of mythological belief in them as embodying the spirit of the people, the spirit of the party.
At the time, Goebbels' appeal does work. It makes it look to the German people that something is happening. But this illusion will not last unless the Führer can restore his reputation as a great military leader. So, in his drug-crazed state, he plans a last desperate gamble, a top-secret offensive to defeat the Allies in the West with one huge knockout blow. By the autumn of 1944, Hitler has few military options. The Allies are tightening the vice around Germany. Aware that support at home is ebbing away, Hitler decides to seize the initiative.
Germany can't survive for very long. There's got to be one last great victory somewhere.
Working day and night, he searches for weakness in his enemies. And finally, he thinks he finds one. Since D-Day, the Allies have been pushing through France, but their advance has left them vulnerable. All their supplies and reinforcements have to be shipped in from Britain. And the most important port for the Allies is Antwerp in Belgium. Everything comes through from Antwerp. It is absolutely vital. Cut the supply lines from Antwerp, and the Allies will grind to a halt, making them easy prey for Hitler's army.
His idea is to drive a wedge between the British and Americans to repeat the Blitzkrieg success of 1940, potentially to throw the British back into the sea.
Hitler then identifies just the place to make his push. Through the heavily wooded area of the Ardennes, the same place he had launched his attack on France 4 years earlier. It is now only lightly defended by American troops.
And he sees that bulge through the Ardennes region, where the Allies have overexposed themselves. He said, that's our salvation.
If his panzers can pierce the line here, he could split the British and American allies, cut them off from the coast, and seize the port of Antwerp. So he assembles his entire strategic reserve. Some 300,000 men, over 2,000 tanks, armored vehicles, and assault guns. He's convinced this plan will restore his power over Germany.
And if it doesn't work, there's nothing to fall back on. There literally is nothing left, in military terms, if the Ardennes campaign fails.
It's a massive gamble, an all-or-nothing throw on one last lightning offensive.
Every gambler knows that the longer you stay at the table, the more chances you have of losing all your money. And that's what Hitler's like. He's like the worst gambler.
The odds against him are enormous. His panzers don't have enough fuel to reach Antwerp. They'll have to capture American supplies. And in the air, the Luftwaffe's remaining fighters face almost total Allied supremacy. But Hitler's sure he's right. He tells Goebbels it's the only way forward.
The two of them stay talking together into the early hours of the morning, kindling up together a vision of this great victory, re-invoking the spirit of 1940 when they had experienced these lightning successes.
To deliver his victory, Hitler summons the field marshals he still trusts. Von Rundstedt, the master strategist who has never been defeated in battle. And Walter Mödel, a committed Nazi known as the Führer's fireman because he never lets down his leader in a crisis. But when they hear about the plan, they're nervous.
The risk that they see in the Ardennes offensive is that it's the last throw of the dice. They're assembling everything that they've got to throw at the Allies, and if it doesn't work, that's it. There's nothing left in the armory.
In fact, von Rundstedt doesn't want to be involved at all. He's well aware of Hitler's limitations as a strategist. He finds a way to sit out the battle.
He feigned some stomach complaint. He was sick, he was unwell, he had ulcer perhaps. He tried to suggest that it'd better if someone else did the planning of that part of the campaign, because he didn't feel, he wasn't confident that he could go through with it. He didn't think it would work.
But there is one elite force that Hitler can still rely on. The fanatical Nazis of the Waffen-SS.
They were men you could still trust. The Waffen-SS, the last good Germans left, the last great military force to save the nation.
The lead element in the Ardennes offensive is the 6th SS Panzer Army, commanded by Sepp Dietrich, an SS Colonel General, who is effectively an old drinking buddy of Hitler's.
Dietrich has stood by Hitler since the 1920s, from the early days as his bodyguard to fighting his fiercest battles.
He was somebody who had always got things done for Hitler, and I think at that stage, Hitler was clutching at straws.
Preparations continue in the utmost secrecy. There must be no sign of the coming attack.
The name of the operation was Operation Watch on the Rhine, which had a strong defensive connotation. The Allies knew through signals intercepts that German troops were being massed in northwest Germany, but they didn't appreciate what it was for. They thought it was some sort of redeployment to establish a defensive line.
Hitler bans all radio communication. Surprise will be crucial. In the early hours, just before Christmas, the attack begins. The panzers surge through the American front lines. Bad weather protects them from Allied air attack. At first, the Americans don't know what has hit them. In the south, the panzers advance over 50 miles. After 2 days, Hitler's gamble still seems to be paying off. Back home, Goebbels is desperate to see how news of the attack will affect public opinion. His headlines make it clear how much is at stake. In fact, the early reports from the secret police reveal Hitler's plan is working. People are falling in behind the Führer.
They are deeply joyous that we have again gained the initiative, especially since no one had expected that.
But the Allies regroup quicker than Hitler expects. The advance is checked. The German war machine runs out of fuel. Soon after Christmas, Hitler has to accept the grim reality. His last throw of the dice has failed. There is now no hope that the war can be won. January 1945. Endgame for Nazi Germany. As the Allies advance on all sides, the 1,000-year Reich, built on illusion and delusion, is crumbling. What now for Adolf Hitler and the band of criminal conspirators around him? This is the story of how the Nazi regime keeps lying to the very end, as it collapses into plots, power struggles, and madness. But there is still time for one last great betrayal of the German people. On the 12th anniversary of the Nazi Party coming to power, Adolf Hitler is preparing to address his people. Outside, battle is raging. The Allies are penetrating Germany, the heart of the Third Reich. The Führer delivers one final rallying cry.
God the Almighty has made our nation. By defending its existence, we are defending His work. The fact that this defense is fraught with incalculable misery, suffering, and hardship makes us even more attached to this nation.
The tone of defiance is the same as ever, but the war is nearly lost.
They're fighting a war on 2-3 fronts. They're starved of any natural resources they previously had. Only a complete fanatic such as Hitler would think there was still a chance.
This will be the last time the German people hear their Führer's voice. What the public can't see is that Hitler is a mere shadow of the man he once was. At just 55, he's suffering from stomach disorders and twitching spasms. An aged grey wreck of a man, increasingly dependent on a sinister quack, Dr. Theodor Morell.
By the turn of the year 44-45, he is a very sick man, Hitler. He's stooped, he's prematurely aged, he's suffering from jaundice, he shakes uncontrollably. At times, his whole body shook. Other times, it's simply the left side, the left arm particularly. He survives on a cocktail of drugs, which his Dr. Morell gives him.
Despite his pitiful condition, and the overwhelming military situation, he still clings to the belief he can win.
Hitler is completely deluded by this point. I mean, he's so out there, he's clearly insane. There's absolutely no way that the German army, depleted of proper weaponry, machines, and, with a vastly reduced manpower, is going to be able to basically turn back this inevitable collapse.
Hitler is pinning his hopes on new miracle weapons. Weapons like the Me-262, the world's first operational jet fighter, capable of nearly 600 miles per hour. And the V-2 rocket, the first ballistic missile and the first man-made object to enter space.
A lot of faith is put into so-called kind of miracle weapons, such as V-2 rockets. But these aren't game changers. These are weapons that are going to cause some harm, but they're not going to cause the Allies to withdraw from the fight.
The jet fighters are produced too late, in too few numbers, and have no impact against the numerically superior Allied air forces. And as German forces retreat, rocket launch sites are captured, preventing them from posing any further threat. For the people in his intimate circle, it is nearing decision time. Men like Hermann Goering, the Führer's long-anointed successor, who had been with him since almost the beginning. For Heinrich Himmler, the head of the SS, the driving force behind the Holocaust. And Joseph Goebbels, his propaganda chief. Do they stay and go down with the man they'd all sworn to serve? Or do they abandon him and make their own plans?
It's like rats deserting a sinking ship. All of the military people want to give up. Most of the cronies around Hitler, with one or two exceptions, Goebbels being the most prominent, think the game is up as well. And so really, this is sort of waiting for the end.
Joseph Goebbels decides to stand by his Führer. He was the chief architect of the tactic that has enabled the Nazis to fool so many Germans for so long. The trick of making the Nazis look outwardly respectable and noble while hiding the criminal reality.
Goebbels is perhaps the most intellectual of the Nazis, but he was a man who could be very sharp in terms of his sense of realism. Oddly, he sacrifices this sense of realism for his love for the Führer. The Führer can do no wrong.
Despite the hopeless situation, bombed out cities, food shortages, and fears of the advancing Russian Red Army, Goebbels throws all his energy into one final illusion, his most lavish propaganda piece to date.
The best way to look at the mentality of Goebbels at this stage is to look at the premiere of a film called Kohlberg. And this is a period drama about the Napoleonic Wars and a brave defense against the Napoleonic army by Prussian defending forces. And he makes this really the big blockbuster of the year, where all these people are fighting this sort of hopeless task, and at the last minute they turn it round and they defeat Napoleon.
The parallels are obvious. German resistance against the odds. Goebbels is creating an alternative reality. If he can't win the war, then he will win at least the movie. He even pulls troops from the Eastern Front to act as extras.
He clearly felt that these soldiers were as usefully deployed, if not more usefully deployed, working for a film like this temporarily, as actually fighting on the front. So it's a real testimony, the financing, the lavish production of the film, the diversion of resources into its imagined huge propaganda value. The film finally opens on January 30th, 1945,
in a temporary cinema under constant threat of air raids, and screens until the fall of Berlin in May 1945. Almost no one sees it.
I think that really sums up the kind of strange world that Goebbels and Hitler occupied at this particular stage. They are the only people who think a film can make any difference to what's going on, and that film doesn't even get distributed around Germany.
But in his own strange way, Goebbels is remaining true to his principles. He is unwavering in his loyalty. But for others, like Himmler and Goering, as Germany collapses, they see chances to feather their own nests. As the relentless Allied advance continues, there can be no doubt that the days of the 1,000-year Reich are numbered.
Town after town surrenders. For them, the bombing is over.
There's no question that defeat is looming. I mean, this is really, Wagner's Gotterdammerung writ large. Here we have a regime that came to power saying that we'll create a 1,000-year Reich, and now, within 12 short years, it's on the edge of catastrophe.
By February 1945, 196 Russian divisions are attempting to encircle the capital, Berlin.
It's not quite every man for himself, but a lot of people are thinking this is obviously ending, it's ending soon, it's ending badly, and, Christmas 45 is not going to be a Nazi Christmas.
For the circle around the increasingly deluded Hitler, it's time to start making plans for the future. What will become of them when the war is over?
This is a criminal regime from top to bottom. Everyone in some way is tainted by this regime and infected by this regime, and there are few in the Nazi elite who think they are going to escape justice here. They know that unless they try and cover up what's happened and pretend that they were only taking orders from Hitler and they didn't want to do it, then they are going to head for the hangman's noose.
Heinrich Himmler, even by Nazi standards, is a monster. A former chicken farmer, he is a man of petty jealousies and a rabid anti-Semite. He has been at the heart of all the darkest Nazi activities.
He is the man who has organised the sterilisation of the congenitally feeble in the early part of the Third Reich. He's organised the euthanasia of incurably ill and psychiatrically disabled people. He's then been central to the extermination of the Jews.
By 1945, his worst crime, the Holocaust, has become public knowledge. Himmler is personally responsible for the systematic state-sponsored murder of over 6 million people. And he knows that unless he does something to turn his personal situation round, he will be at the top of any list of war criminals when the war is over.
He's seen in some ways as worse than Hitler. And the horrors of the camps are being realised, and they were Himmler's own particular province.
He constructed and controlled a vast network of facilities across the Reich designed to concentrate, hold, and kill Jews on an industrial scale.
Everyone is thinking, the day of reckoning is coming. They know that the Allies are going to put them on trial for what has happened. They've said it long enough. There will be a war trial, and you, criminals, will be brought to book.
From January 1945, Himmler tries to hide the evidence.
The facilities used for extermination, the gas chambers at Auschwitz, for example, are all blown up so that they're not necessarily immediately recognizable for what they are.
As the Russians advance through the occupied territories, Himmler forcibly marches the few surviving prisoners from the death camps in Poland to concentration camps in Germany. But this time, it is not just about covering his tracks. He thinks he's developed a cunning plan.
The reason for the evacuation is not so much a cover-up, it's to maintain control over the Jewish prisoners so that Himmler still has this bargaining chip.
Secretly, he's planning to use the remaining Jews as a means of negotiating a deal for his own survival. He's even hoping to make money from it. Discreetly, he puts the word out that he's open for business.
A number of approaches were made to Himmler, testing the water to see whether he was prepared to release Jews from the concentration camp system in return for money, military material, and so on. Probably the best known of these was from a former president of the Swiss Confederation, Jean-Marie Moussi, who had known Himmler previously from anti-communist activities.
Himmler makes Moussi an offer. He will free some of the Jews he holds in concentration camps in return for 20 million Swiss francs, to be paid by Jewish sources in the US.
It's a measure of the callousness of Himmler that he would use Jewish lives in order to strike some sort of bargain to save, whatever skin he could. This is a man who'd been killing Jews for quite a few years now, in their millions, and now he's, negotiating with a few thousand here and there to get what he wants. It's just disgusting.
Incredibly, Himmler even believes this might be the start of a process that could end with the Allies installing him as the future leader of Germany.
So what Himmler is hoping to get from this is a reputation in the West as somebody who is prepared to do a deal and somebody who it might be worth dealing with into the future.
This is a high-risk strategy for Himmler. Going behind Hitler's back to make money in return for releasing Jews goes against everything Hitler stands for.
It contradicts every notion there'd been since 1922, that the enemy was the Jew, the enemy was international Jewry, and it could never be compromised with. It's a total destruction of the basic belief. It would destroy Nazism.
Incredibly, the first trainload of 1,700 Jews actually makes it to Switzerland. Himmler had been promised a deposit of $250,000. But at this point, news of the plan leaks out, and Himmler has to call the deal off. But it won't be the last time he tries to make a deal behind the Führer's back. As Himmler plots, the military situation continues to deteriorate. Too late to successfully mount any form of serious counterattack or proper defense from the front, Hitler becomes cut off, spending more and more time in his Berlin bunker.
The Red Army has marched all across Europe and is now at the very edge of Germany as well. Everything is going to come home to Hitler in that bunker.
Someone once said, rather aptly, that Hitler had a bunker obsession. He had bunkers on the Western Front, he had a number on the Eastern Front. He has this idea that the bunker is the salvation. If you hide in the ground, things will get better on top eventually.
Above ground, Berlin is no longer safe. In their heaviest raid of the war, 1,500 American bombers dropped 2,000 tons of bombs on the Reich capital. The Chancellery area is badly hit, causing extensive destruction and knocking out the water, electricity, heating, and telephone lines. For Goebbels, This is another opportunity. Exaggerating the numbers killed, here and in other aerial raids, including the infamous Allied bombing of Dresden, he tries to foster a greater sense of public spirit and unity. But by now, no one cares.
Life in Berlin for ordinary people in the final months of the war becomes extraordinarily difficult. The sheer business of survival, of getting food or basic hygiene, becomes so overwhelming that the strategy for survival is all that people can think about at this time.
Although dying in their thousands on a daily basis, the German people are unaware that the man to whom they have pledged allegiance, the Führer, is even now preparing to betray them one last time.
The Nero Decree is this remarkable decision on the part of a very sick man, sick physically and mentally, that if Germany can't come through the war through its own efforts, it must be allowed to be destroyed.
Hitler's Nero Decree orders the wholesale destruction of German infrastructure to prevent its use by the encroaching Allies.
This isn't simply to deprive the Allies of resources, it's to say Germany did not deserve to survive. It's the idea of going down in flames. If defeat is unavoidable, then everything must be destroyed. The Allies must be left nothing.
This action will destroy all hope of the German people having any kind of decent life after he has gone.
Hitler feels really that the German people have let him down and that they deserve, as part of this outcome of the social Darwinian struggle, deserve to die and be sacrificed to the greater forces of history.
By now, beyond the bunker, the Third Reich is little more than a few isolated pockets in northern Europe, northern Italy, and Germany itself. The rest is under occupation and beyond Hitler's reach.
The situation in March and April 1945 in many ways is completely chaotic. There isn't a coherent national picture anymore. People take very little notice at this stage of what goes on in the bunker, of what Hitler might be thinking.
Hiding out of sight of his people in his Berlin bunker, Hitler is still clinging to his delusions. After miracle weapons, he has a new fantasy. The Allies will split.
There had been for some time in Germany a belief that the Allies could not hold, that the unnatural alliance between the West and the East, between the Soviet and the United States, for example, it was so unnatural politically that it wouldn't hold.
On the 12th of April 1945, Hitler believes he has got his miracle. US President Franklin D. Roosevelt dies. Roosevelt himself had done much to smooth the uneasy union between Stalin and the West, and had held the alliance together.
It was an unnatural, unholy alliance, you might say, between capitalist West and Soviet communist East. For how long would it hold? And the Nazi desperate notion is, if the Allies split, there is hope for us.
But it comes to nothing. The alliance holds. The Western Allies give up on the race to Berlin, as it will fall under the Russian sphere of influence after the war, and they shelve their political differences until the unconditional surrender of Germany is achieved. The Red Army is closing in. On Hitler's 56th birthday, Russian long-range artillery starts bombarding Berlin city center. It's now just a matter of time.
There's a very interesting relationship between Hitler and Goebbels in the last months of the war. Goebbels spoke to him about the need to try to find a diplomatic solution to the war. But at the end, he had to concede that he couldn't change Hitler's set determination to continue the war militarily to the bitter end and, if necessary, to defeat.
As the Red Army advances on Berlin, preparations are being made for Hitler's 56th birthday. On previous occasions, this has been a monumental event, a public occasion.
Hitler's birthday has been one of celebration. A time for gaiety, a time for fun, as far as the Nazis ever engaged in fun. By 45, of course, the world has changed. Germany is heading for defeat, and everybody, including Hitler, knows this by his birthday.
Rising late, around 11 a.m. to the sound of heavy artillery shelling, the Führer's birthday celebrations are a mournful affair, despite the presence of his long-term companion, Eva Braun.
And there's some attempt at jollity. It's all terribly artificial, and there's a deep sense of gloom that hovers over the whole proceedings. But a cake is made for him. He literally plays with soldiers, little toy soldiers that he loved.
This bizarre occasion will turn out to be the last great gathering of the Nazi elite.
The birthday party is kind of a tragic scene. It's a bit like sort of, you know, people camping around the oxygen tent of a father they don't really like, but they all might get something from his will.
As part of the celebrations, Goebbels sets up a photo opportunity, persuading Hitler to leave the bunker and inspect a group of decorated Hitler youth. It will be his last public appearance. But so powerful is his grip on the nation that even now the illusion remains in place. Young boys are prepared to die for him in the hopeless defense of Berlin.
They line up, this sad line-up of young men, and he goes along the line, this stooped figure, and pulling at the cheeks some of the lads and patting them on the cheeks and saying, you're a great hero of Germany. It's almost bad theatre. Perhaps it is bad theatre. He must have known the cause was lost. But he chats to them, he speaks to them as if they were the heroes of the future, as if there's some hope for them.
For those around Hitler, for all the show of unity, it is now time to act.
If Germany was going to survive after the Second World War, in any way, shape or form, the army had to survive. And if the army survived, they needed a potential leader.
Outwardly, Hermann Göring, deputy leader of the party, remains loyal to his Führer. He had been with Hitler from the very beginning. He had led the brown shirts, fought in the attempted coup in 1923, built up and led the Nazis' air force. He is also a morphine addict. But increasingly, he has been marginalized.
Göring falls out of favour because of what happens in the war itself. The Luftwaffe doesn't perform very well. Where were all these fighter planes that he'd promised? Where were all these massive bombers that he'd promised? So it seemed as though he hadn't delivered in so many areas, and that's why he started to sink down the hierarchy.
Nonetheless, he is still officially Hitler's nominated successor, and he believes when the Führer is gone, he can cut a deal.
I think Göring believes that the Allies are as sort of flexible as he is. Politicians who can be negotiated with. He thinks of these people as people who've changed their mind before. Why won't they change their mind again? Maybe this unconditional surrender is negotiable.
Even before the party is over, Göring is packing his bags. After a few vague words and a handshake, he leaves the birthday celebrations and heads for Berchtesgaden in the Bavarian Alps, safer and closer to the American lines. After swearing an oath of loyalty, Heinrich Himmler also leaves the party.
I don't think anyone really understood at that point that Hitler was just going to stay in Berlin and go down in flames. So Himmler has to maintain the facade that he is loyal, that he's still working for the cause, although clearly by then he'd decided that it was all over.
Himmler is in fact pursuing a new angle of negotiation. He has made contact with the vice president of the Swedish Red Cross, Count Folke Bernadotte, and is secretly maneuvering to increase his power and take over.
What Bernadotte is looking for is the release of Scandinavian, Western European Jewish prisoners from the concentration camp system. Negotiations, including several face-to-face meetings between Himmler and Bernadotte, take place over the next few weeks, really leading up until the end of April 1945.
His plan is to position himself as the reasonable Nazi, the person who the Allies can do business with.
He sees only one way out, and that is a negotiated settlement, with himself possibly as the chief negotiator and therefore the leader of the reformed Germany that will emerge.
It's a measure of the kind of pie-in-the-sky attitude that some of these Nazis have towards the war, that both Himmler and Goering feel that there's some sense in kind of cutting a deal with the Allies or even kind of taking over the rapidly disintegrating German state.
As for Hitler, he is now left in his bunker, completely unaware of the plans being made by his loyal followers. With him are only Goebbels and Martin Bormann, his private secretary, a long-standing Nazi thug who has quietly been ingratiating himself with the Führer. As the war around Berlin continues to rage, discipline in the bunker starts to break down.
The scenes within the bunker underneath the Chancellery are a vision out of hell, really. It's crowded, it's sweaty, it's hot. People are kind of disobeying Hitler by kind of smoking rather a lot. There's a lot of drunkenness, and it's a kind of microcosm for the whole kind of madness of what the Third Reich's been about.
Living in a bizarre fantasy, Hitler appoints, promotes, and relieves generals at whim. And he lays ludicrous plans for a final decisive victory, to be led by General Steiner, a former SS commander.
He puts his faith in two armies, which didn't exist by this time, but he believes they do. That between them, they will form some sort of pincer movement, enclosing themselves around Berlin, breaking the Soviet grip and preventing the Allies coming from the West. It's a total delusion by this time, but he believes in it.
But just 2 days after his birthday, Berlin's inner circle of defenses are breached. The Soviet forces almost encircle the city. Worse still, without sufficient resources, Steiner is unable to launch his attack. News reaches the bunker.
He's told by his generals that the game is completely up, Berlin cannot be defended, and the Red Army will be in the bunker within 24 hours.
And it's then he goes very quiet for some minutes and then has this huge outburst of anger. He expresses his detestation for the generals who'd led him into this position, for the men who've let him down, men who won't die in the cause, prefer to give up and withdraw.
He rants and he raves about how the generals let him down throughout the war and how now all the people are deserting this sinking ship.
Critically, he also says that everyone might as well go home. he has no further orders. Everyone present takes this as his abdication. Hitler is no longer the Führer. But no one tells the people of Germany. In the streets above the bunker, what's left of the population, young boys and old men, have been called up to continue the increasingly desperate defense of Berlin.
There are very strict Führer's orders not to surrender, to fight literally to the last man. And that is, of course, in many ways what does happen in Berlin, where there is street-to-street fighting. Even today, if you walk through Berlin, you can still see bullet holes on many of the buildings from those final days of the war.
In Berchtesgaden, news of Hitler's breakdown reaches Goering. He assumes Hitler is now unwilling or incapable of leading the party.
The Hitler that he used to know in the early part of the Munich period no longer exists. This is an empty shell of a man.
So, on the basis of the long-standing succession law, this means he can take over.
He sends a telegram to Hitler saying, look, the game is up, you are trapped in Berlin. For the sake of the German Reich, give me the party officers as your deputy to take over as Führer, and I'll do my best to negotiate our way to the end of this war.
But, back in Berlin, Goering's telegram falls into the wrong hands.
It's intercepted by Martin Bormann, who then takes this telegram in sort of Uriah Heep mode, presents it to him and says, look, he's plotting against you. We have not finished the war. There's still a chance even now that things can be turned around. Hitler can't believe it.
Extraordinarily, with the war all but lost, Bormann now sees an opportunity for his own advancement and his chance to take over the Reich. With Goering out of the way, he can win promotion. So he convinces Hitler of Goering's treachery and persuades the Führer to arrest and eject him from the party. This is all the more ridiculous because just 3 days after Hitler's critical outburst towards his generals, Russian forces link up, completing their ring around the city. An hour later, Russian and US forces meet up, splitting the Reich in half. Himmler also hears the news of the Führer's supposed abdication, and through Bernadotte writes a letter to the Western Allies.
Himmler puts his cards on the table with Bernadotte that it's all over.
He now styles himself the provisional leader of Germany and is hoping for peace with the British and Americans and an alliance against the Soviets.
Himmler saw possibility that, as the man in control of the SS and the police, that he could maintain stability within Germany, he could prevent a sort of meltdown. He still saw himself as an important man, that's the key to it, and that he had influence within Germany.
But in Stockholm, the letter is leaked to the international press. The negotiations are immediately broken off.
The fallout for Himmler of this peace offer emerging is that he is immediately dismissed from all of his posts within the German government.
The full extent of Himmler's betrayal is revealed to Hitler.
I think it was a big personal blow for Hitler. He had assumed that of all the members of the Nazi hierarchy, Himmler was the one who was least likely to betray him.
Alone and with no more options, he writes his last will and testament. Despite Himmler and Goering, the head of the Navy, Admiral Dönitz, is appointed Reich President. Goebbels and Bormann are rewarded for their loyalty. Goebbels becomes Chancellor, effectively Prime Minister. And Bormann is made head of the Nazi Party. Though, of course, there is no Reich to be Prime Minister of, and no Nazi Party worth leading. Hitler's final act is to marry his long-standing partner, Eva Braun.
As if things couldn't get more kind of Shakespearean and tragic in the bunker, you've then got this farcical marriage ceremony that takes place between Hitler and his long-term girlfriend, Eva Braun, who had actually been largely hidden from view from the German public. It's obviously a kind of sop to Eva Braun, something he'd always promised that he would give her his hand in marriage.
It's her bonus, I think someone called it, the marriage. It's his way of saying to her, you have honoured your position as my associate. I'm prepared to make you my wife. Something I've always denied myself because I was married to Germany.
He gives her a kiss in front of his acolytes. He's never done that before. The next day, we see that he has a final meal with his secretaries. He thanks them as well. He moves away. There's a tearful sort of interchange.
Shortly after 3 p.m., Hitler and new wife Eva withdraw to his private apartment in the bunker. He hands her a cyanide capsule. The decision has been made. They will end their lives together. She takes the poison, and he shoots himself with his Walther PPK.
It's a brutal, nasty end, and entirely fitting, frankly.
Adolf Hitler is dead by his own hand. Betrayed by his most favored henchman, the regime is in its death throes. But even so, the German people are told one last lie.
Führer headquarters reports that our Führer Adolf Hitler fell this afternoon in his command post in the Chancellery whilst fighting against Bolshevism to his last breath.
The final Nazi lie is the fact that Hitler has gone down fighting in the streets of Berlin. Of course, it's completely untrue.
The news of Hitler's death doesn't necessarily come as the big shock that we might imagine it to have been today. People in the final months of the war have become so preoccupied with the business of day-to-day survival that ideology and with it the person of Hitler have really taken a bit of a back seat. There are famous stories that refugees from the East are arriving in Lübeck and in Hamburg and being greeted by Red Cross helpers with the sentence, "Hitler's dead, would you like some hot soup?" And the second half of that sentence was infinitely more important than the first.
Meanwhile, the Nazi government descends into farce. Besides Hitler's appointed leader, Admiral Dönitz, Himmler, Goering, and Goebbels are all independently trying to negotiate peace deals. In Berlin, Goebbels is officially the Chancellor of Germany. At the 11th hour, he tries and fails to negotiate an arrangement with Marshal Zhukov, the leader of the Russian forces.
Goebbels' last overture to Zhukov has the sense of a last desperate throw of the dice. One, I think, without any hope of seeing anything come from it either.
The Russians reject his approach. For Goebbels, it is now truly over.
I think all the way through Goebbels' career, he's been so loyal to Hitler. He sees him as some kind of demigod. He's been his kind of promoter, his spin doctor, his propagandist. So he looks forward to a Germany without Hitler and without the Nazi Party with absolute horror. He doesn't want to live in this society.
Goebbels and his wife Magda now commit a terrible crime. They poison their own children.
The willingness of a woman to destroy her own family because National Socialism had failed. That shows the inhumanity and absurdity of Nazism. In its death throes, it took down 6 innocent children. Even the lives of the innocent are to be sacrificed. There is no humanity you can turn to once Nazism has failed.
With their children dead, they kill themselves. As for Himmler, his attempt to negotiate a deal via contacts in Sweden has also collapsed. With no role left to play and cut loose from the party, he tries to lose himself within the hordes of POWs, but is spotted at a British Army checkpoint.
Himmler is taken off for interrogation, and during the course of this, he takes his little round glasses out, puts them on his face, and says, "Heinrich Himmler." And they realize they've caught the big fish.
An empty brass cyanide case is found, which initiates a full-body search.
As the doctor goes for his mouth to hold it open, Himmler bit him, stepped back, took the capsule out of his tooth where it had been concealed, bit down on it.
In an attempt to flush the cyanide from his body, doctors repeatedly force him to vomit.
There's too much poison in his system, and he dies in agony on the floor of a British Army interrogation cell, wearing an old British Army shirt and nothing else.
In Bavaria, with his main rivals out of the way, Goering, the great survivor and pretender, makes his move.
They're all going down, the whole thing's going to pieces, but you know, I think if I get in a room with people, I can survive this. And I think that exemplifies his personality. He felt he was one of life's survivors, that his big personality would get him through.
Having drafted a letter to the Supreme Allied Commander, General Dwight D. Eisenhower, he surrenders to the Americans in a blaze of media publicity. Goering expects to be treated with all the courtesy of a head of state.
There are some people in this world they've got an inner confidence in themselves, you know, and he's one of them. Even his arrest is something of a triumph, isn't it, for this man? And it goes back to this idea of himself as a survivor. He is going to somehow extricate himself from all of this mayhem. He's going to sit around drinking schnapps with the Allied generals, and he's going to say to them, well, you know, all of this wasn't my responsibility, not me.
But Eisenhower won't see him, and now he's just another prisoner of war. In Berlin, there is just one man left, Martin Bormann, the official head of the Nazi Party. Leaving the Chancellery, he makes a run for it, but is caught up in the fighting and killed. And so the 1,000-year Reich and its criminal leaders meet their fate. On May 7th, 1945, Germany finally surrenders unconditionally. In 1945, Germany is defeated. Now the awful reality of what Adolf Hitler and his cronies have been up to is revealed. Germany has been mind-captured and committed the most heinous crimes in history. The Allies are adamant that this must never happen again. This is the story of the struggle to denazify Germany. Advancing through Germany, Allied forces make a gruesome discovery. On forward patrol, American soldiers of the US Third Army come across a sight that defies description.
They found emaciated prisoners, they found disease, they found starvation. This was a huge shock to see this, but what stuck in the memory, of course, were the corpses.
It is estimated that as many as 56,000 people died in the Buchenwald concentration camp, in some of the worst conditions imaginable. It was the second largest concentration camp on German soil.
Some 900 children were liberated at Buchenwald, many of them in an absolutely terrible condition. Many of them died shortly afterwards. To put children, some so young as 3 or 4, in these camps and allow them to starve because they were useless eaters, as the SS put it. That was a level of inhumanity that I think shocked many of the Allies in a manner they simply could not come to terms with.
The news is passed up the chain of command right to the top. 8 days later, the highest-ranking American generals in Europe, Eisenhower, Patton, and Bradley, visit the camp.
When the camps were opened up, there was an intense feeling of anger that people like Eisenhower very strongly expressed. We must make these people suffer. We must punish them for what they've done.
In the eyes of Supreme Commander Eisenhower and of the world, this kind of torture and beating practiced on the prisoners is a crime.
He became determined that the world should know about these crimes. He became determined that they should be broadcast.
Throughout Germany, the scene of death repeats itself in concentration camps along the path of the Allied advance.
Films were made, photographs were taken. And as far as Eisenhower was concerned, it was a crime that the world was never to be allowed to forget, and the Germans never to be allowed to forget.
This film shows the first time ordinary Germans are made to confront the horrific reality of what their beloved regime has been up to. But even worse than the concentration camps in Germany are the extermination camps like Auschwitz and Majdanek in Poland, liberated by the Russians. The discovery of a network of these camps provides solid evidence of the systematic, wholesale, industrial murder of millions of people by gassing and extreme work under starvation conditions. The Allies realize the Nazis are an enemy, the like of which has never been seen before.
They haven't been fighting against any old nation here. They've been fighting against a gangster regime that kills Jewish people. And they can see just the depth of humanity to which this regime has sunk.
As the scale of the atrocities becomes apparent, It reveals the number of people that must have been involved. It seems that almost every German is implicated.
You've got the train driver driving a trainload of Jews across Europe. He knows what's going on, but he's not asking any questions. You've got the civil servant working in some small department in Berlin who's probably responsible for supplying the cattle trucks. You've got, obviously, the kind of bigwigs making these decisions, but when you put all those cogs together, then you've got a murder machine.
This sophisticated organization illustrates one of the Nazi regime's most insidious skills, making it easy for individuals to be part of this killing machine without feeling personally implicated, even if it was happening on their doorstep.
They were sort of turning a blind eye to it. So either they were ignoring it and ignoring all the rumours that were obviously going about, or they knew about it and they were lying about what they knew about. Either way, it's a kind of morally bankrupt position.
The extent of the crime is so great that the Allies realize that they need to change the mindset of the entire German people.
The Allies think long and hard about what's appropriate and what's fair and what's just at the end of the Second World War. This has been a regime that has gone out consciously to exterminate whole populations. Millions of people have died. Enormous areas have been destroyed. And so the sense is this needs something special, this needs something new.
The Allies need to undo years of Nazi indoctrination and prove to the German people that everything they have believed in and been acting on is wrong.
The Allies decide that they need to adopt a programme of denazification. They need to re-educate the German people.
This is a huge challenge and will take time. The country is under military occupation, governed by regional commanders with differing agendas. A uniform nationwide approach is needed. The Allies decide to implement a three-point plan. First, they abolish the Nazi Party.
Crowds gather in the marketplace to hear Allied orders, to read the Allied proclamations disbanding the Nazi Party, Nazi laws and institutions.
Secondly, they need to identify its criminal members. Finally, they need to bring its leaders to justice. But this is harder than it seems. Adolf Hitler, the criminal mastermind behind the Third Reich, is dead. Joseph Goebbels, his propaganda minister, also commits suicide. As does Heinrich Himmler, the man responsible for the Holocaust. But they have captured Hermann Göring. He had been with Hitler from the very beginning. He had led the Brown Shirts, fought in the attempted coup in 1923, and built up and led the Nazis' air force.
Here is a man known throughout the world as being Hitler's number two. He's been involved in everything. The Gestapo, the Final Solution, everywhere. His finger is in every single pie. Here is the man that they can hold up as one of the chief perpetrators of the whole war crimes machine of the Third Reich.
Following the official German surrender, the Allies quickly round up other senior figures in the regime.
They found representatives of the armed forces. So Keitel, Jodl, who are the senior generals, Dönitz, who had been in charge of the U-boats and then had been briefly Chancellor after Hitler's suicide. Speer, the armaments minister, who had drafted in millions of people from all over Europe to serve as slave labourers in Nazi Germany.
They decide to prove to the German people once and for all that their leaders are no more than criminals. The Allies decide on an unprecedented step to put them on trial for war crimes. By the summer of 1945, the Allies are in full control of defeated Germany. Now they can begin the process of making sure atrocities like the Holocaust never happen again. The German mindset must be cleansed. They need to prove to the public that the Nazi leadership they so trusted and believed in are no more than a common criminal conspiracy.
It was no longer sufficient for these individuals to say, we were following the orders of the state. The Allies wanted to demonstrate that these actions, these decisions, were not merely political actions, but actions that had crossed a line into illegality.
In London, during June 1945, the world's first international tribunal drafts an entire new set of laws. These laws define the crimes the Nazis have committed.
There were 4 crimes. Crimes against peace, which is waging illegal war. War crimes, breaking the rules on methods and means of warfare, the Hague Conventions.
War crimes include shooting prisoners of war. But there is worse.
Crimes against humanity, terrible atrocities against individuals. And conspiracy, essentially membership of criminal organizations like the SS. Participation in those organizations, participation in the regime, became a criminal act.
What better place to show the world how evil the Nazi regime is than in its propaganda homeland, Nuremberg?
Nuremberg had been the site of the great Nazi Party rallies in the 1930s and was where the infamous laws on German citizenship had been passed.
In its favor, Nuremberg also has a surviving building suitable enough to house the proceedings.
Prelude to the Nuremberg trials. The courtroom is being made ready. The tribunal before which top-ranking Nazis will appear for the war criminal trial.
The scarred Palace of Justice with a bit of renovation is an ideal location. This courtroom is temporarily expanded to provide a gallery for 350 representatives of the world's press and seating for 400 members of the public. This will be the venue for the trial of the century.
Prisoners!
Early in the morning, 6 months after the end of the war, Hermann Goering and the other defendants are ushered from their cells into the floodlit courtroom. Taking the Western legal approach, it will be up to the prosecution to prove the individual defendants guilty of the charges, beyond all reasonable doubt.
Britain's Lord Justice Lawrence addresses the defendants
to plead guilty or not guilty to the charges against them.
Bekenne mich im Sinne der Anklage nicht schuldig.
Not guilty.
The proceedings soon become bogged down. Establishing guilt, especially linking witnesses to the final solution, proves surprisingly difficult.
Perhaps I ought to just remind the tribunal that
in the course of the trial, the prosecutors ran into all sorts of difficulties. The individual defendants were able to claim that these documents didn't bear their signatures, that they didn't relate to the particular branch of the administration they had worked with, and in some cases the defendants knew that context rather better than the prosecutors.
But I trust the court is not unaware that outside of this courtroom...
After 4 months, the prosecution finally rests and Goering takes the stand. Off the drugs, slimmed down and fit, he is a skilled and formidable adversary.
The responsibility implicit...
He's cross-examined by Robert Jackson, and for Robert Jackson it goes disastrously wrong. It turns out that Goering is a formidable individual with a remarkable memory.
Goering, the showman, is in his element.
He was the star of the trial. Every newspaper reporter who was there mentions this in the dispatches, how he keeps shaking his head, taking off his headphones, laughing at every moment when he thinks they're saying something ridiculous.
And SS Gruppenführer Heydrich. We're right about that, aren't we?
Das ist richtig, und dazu muss ich aber nun die Erklärung...
Hermann Goering rings around Robert Jackson.
All right.
Goering was more on top of the facts about the Nazis. Goering was able to point to the paradoxes of British and American actions which appeared to be unlawful, and Jackson made no progress with him at all.
He tries to influence the other defendants to keep on following this line and to say this court has no legitimacy, let's stick to that line, and he does get through to many of them.
And that one of the purposes here of the defendant Goering...
Things aren't going to plan for the Allies. Goering in particular is skilled at fighting the prosecution. His clever challenges and bold statements hold the courtroom's rapt attention. But it can't last. Eventually, the Allies nail him. Their trump card is the testimony obtained from the camp commandant of Auschwitz whilst in prison.
He then tells the court all about the complicity of Goering in the final solution, which of course maps out the slave labour and the killing process of the Jews in Europe.
Goering's co-defendants are all cross-examined before the defence rests in June 1946.
The evidence was so overwhelming and so comprehensively proved on the basis of documents and witness testimony and images and video footage that I think there wasn't a hope in hell that the major perpetrators were going to get off. What remained was what the sentence would be.
At 3 p.m, in private, away from the glare of the cameras and public, the defendants are returned from the cells to the court to hear the verdicts. As the highest-ranking remaining Nazi, Goering is sentenced to death. Chief of Operations Staff, General Jodl, and his boss, General Keitel, are also condemned to death, along with Foreign Minister von Ribbentrop. For others, it's a prison sentence. Admiral Dönitz, Hitler's official successor, gets 10 years. Armaments Minister Speer gets 20. And former Deputy Führer Rudolf Hess gets life imprisonment. The message to the German public is clear. The people who had led them and who they died for are no more than common criminals. But Goering has no intention of making it easy for the Allies. With his fate sealed, he faces 2 final decisions: how and when he will die.
He's faced with the guilty verdict. He knows he's going to be executed. He even tries to negotiate his form of execution. He says that as a military man, he should face a firing squad and not be hung.
But the Allies insist he be hanged. Just 2 hours before he is due to be executed, Goering is brought his personal effects. Amongst his toiletries is a jar of hair cream. It seems that hidden within it was a capsule of potassium cyanide. At 10 minutes to 11, the last of the Nazi leaders takes his own life.
He escapes the hangman right at the 11th hour. Right to the very end, he's a survivor and he leaves the earth on his own terms.
Even so, Phase 1 of denazification is successfully completed. The Nazi leadership have been dealt with. But now the Allies face a much bigger problem. How do you denazify 70 million Germans? Following the execution of the Nazi leadership, the Allies face a massive task: the denazification of the German people themselves.
The point about Nazism is that it overtook every facet of life, so it was almost impossible to avoid in some way being associated with Nazism.
Only now does the truly insidious nature of Nazism become clear. It pervades all aspects of life, from birth, through marriage, and into death. It even dictated what you ate for dinner on Sunday.
This regime that have held on to this society, whose tentacles have gone right through almost every organisation, every community, have influenced almost every aspect of people's lives. This has to be removed from German society for Europe to move forward.
As the scale of the Holocaust becomes apparent, the wholesale murder of 6 million Jews, it reveals the full extent to which everyone in Germany is implicated.
One war crimes investigator actually told me we were unprepared for the sheer volume of criminality that we encountered. And there were so many people who had committed just, in inverted commas, 1 or 2 murders. I mean, you're looking at around 100,000 people you've got to track down. So that's a major challenge.
An obvious place to look is within the military, but that also presents a problem. By the end of the war, 5 million German soldiers are POWs, held in temporary camps in appalling conditions across Europe, waiting to be processed.
Prisoners are interviewed. The interviews are analyzed, and a check is maintained on the trends of German morale.
Right through 1945, particularly through the summer of 1945, there is a process of vetting going on. And in all of the Allied prisoner of war camps, there was an attempt to screen these millions of people and to sift out from amongst them those who were potentially war criminals and should be subject to some kind of legal process.
Even capture cannot shake the arrogant faith in the Nazi creed that's been bred in them from childhood.
You've had this criminal mentality that's overtaken a nation, and you need to eradicate it. And what you can't do is allow the idea of Nazism to be involved in public life at all.
Eradicating every aspect of Nazism is a mammoth task. The visible signs are the easiest to remove. The swastika is banned, and symbolic eagle imagery is destroyed. But breaking down the Nazi mentality is much harder. There are 8 million members of the Nazi Party. 10% of the population, with millions more enrolled in affiliated organizations.
One of the problems with denazification is that just if you're a member of the Nazi Party, it doesn't automatically make you a Nazi with a capital N. There were people joining the Nazi Party simply because if they weren't in the party, they couldn't keep their jobs, and therefore, they would be out of work and their children and families would suffer.
Anybody who's been in any position of leadership or authority for the last decade and a half is going to in some way have some sort of tainting with Nazism.
The Allies initially decree that all party members be removed and excluded from public office and positions of power, but this proves impractical.
It's a very complicated, difficult thing to do because Nazism had gone so deep in German society that if you literally remove all people who had any link with the Nazi regime, you're going to be left with almost nobody. Maybe a few bus conductors or railway clerks or people whose jobs were completely unpolitical.
With so many people involved in every aspect of the Nazi regime, the Allies decide to focus their attention on locating and pursuing the most committed Nazis.
People working in the public services, in education, in the police, the judiciary, were required to fill in a questionnaire, a lengthy questionnaire, upwards of 80 questions, which effectively probed their political history.
By Christmas 1945, 500,000 forms have been processed at a rate of 10,000 a day. But with 7 million still to assess, the task will take another 2 years, and even then, only a small proportion are prosecuted.
On trial or awaiting trial before special German courts are some 2 million indicted Nazis. Penalties for the guilty range from long terms at hard labor for the worst offenders to fines for those less culpable.
But what many people don't realize is that many of the most serious perpetrators are being allowed to slip through the net and get away with it deliberately. As denazification progresses, the Allies discover they have more important issues to deal with.
It becomes increasingly apparent that Nazis are yesterday's enemy. There's a new enemy to the east, and if you're a Russian, you've got a new enemy to the west.
This is the start of the Cold War, an escalation of political and military tension that would set the Allies against each other and take the world back to the brink of war.
I mean, the Cold War pretty much starts, you could argue, on the 9th of May 45, the day after the collapse.
So, whilst the official public policy might be to hunt down Nazis, secretly the West takes a leaf out of the Nazi handbook and pursues a very different agenda in private. They actually seek them out and protect them.
I think that there's a large amount of cynicism that you can attach to the behaviour of the Americans and the British and indeed the Soviets in the wake of the collapse. Yes, they want to find war criminals, but at the same time, you are taking over a country which has got a lot of very important people who are extremely well qualified to help you with your projects back at home.
There's no clearer example than in the case of the German rocket scientists.
The extraordinary rocket program that the Germans developed from the mid-30s onwards is led by a young aristocrat, a man called Wernher von Braun. And he has the science and the leadership powers to drive a community of very brilliant scientists really into the future, into the next generation of science.
Wernher von Braun's weapons, the V-1 flying bomb and V-2 rocket, had terrified London, killing over 15,000 civilians and damaging up to 20,000 houses a day at the height of the campaign. His V-2 is capable of more than 5 times the speed of sound. Once launched, there are no effective countermeasures. This technology is far in advance of anything the Allies have. In 1942, one of their rockets is even the first man-made artifact to reach space. A landmark moment for mankind.
Rockets are the future. Rockets are the future militarily, as well as in terms of space exploration. And a man of von Braun's qualifications, expertise and success could not be dismissed lightly. And the Americans want him.
The problem is that by anyone's standards, von Braun and his fellow rocket scientists are committed Nazis and are clearly guilty of crimes against humanity.
Von Braun, who had a very black record in terms of his morality, his factories, his armaments production areas were based upon slave labour. Some of the most appalling stories of suffering occur in those camps where those enforced labours are held.
The amount of people who died in the factories and camps that are associated with von Braun probably numbers greater than the people who were killed by some of the rockets he made. So, you know, this is a very morally iffy area.
Despite the awful atrocities he has committed, the Americans decide they need him. In this climate of escalating tension between the superpowers, the Americans start breaking the rules. "765 top scientists and engineers from Hitler's military research programs are whisked away to America without undergoing any process of denazification. This is part of the top-secret Operation Paperclip."
And so a cover or a partial curtain is drawn over the background of some of those arrested. If they can be of use to the Allies individually, then the denazification policy won't be followed through 100%.
But there are complications. Officially, US law prohibits any Nazis from entering America. And President Truman himself has expressly forbidden proven Nazis to be recruited.
To get around the slightly embarrassing fact that a lot of the scientists have got a link with the Nazi Party, the American intelligence agencies actually just rewrite their pasts. They bleach out their Nazi associations, give them sort of new sets of papers. I mean, it's really quite scandalous looking back on it, what's done.
There was a cover-up, lies, we have to say, so that the true reality of what some of these Nazis had done would not be revealed.
With his record wiped clean, Werner von Braun becomes something of a celebrity in America.
This is a model of the U.S. Army's Redstone guided missile.
Initially, he works for the US Army, before becoming director of NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center.
Werner von Braun is, if you like, the acceptable face of Nazism. He's a man whose scientific achievements probably outweigh, certainly in the eyes of the West, his sort of Nazi association.
But the rocket scientists aren't the only type of Nazi the Americans recruit. At a higher, more secret level, they also make illegal deals with the very worst kinds of Nazi, those who are actually responsible for murder and genocide. At the end of the war, the West is committed to eradicating Nazism and hunting down all war criminals. But the advent of the Cold War and mounting tensions between East and West starts to shift the focus of the Allies.
There was never a total commitment to denazification. Perhaps there should have been in moral terms, but there wasn't. And the politics tells us why. The Soviet and the West are at loggerheads.
Germany becomes the front line in this new conflict between East and West.
The division of Germany is agreed upon. Troops of the United States, Britain, and France are to occupy the western portion of the country. The Soviet Union, the eastern portion.
These zones, separately controlled by the Allies, create a hotbed of intrigue and espionage, fueling an atmosphere of suspicion.
The Soviet zone encircles Berlin, which itself becomes a divided city, creating far-reaching problems for the occupying troops.
The West has a problem in the post-war period. It wants to create new political communities that must be anti-fascist, that must not have any taints with Nazi ideology in Germany. But they also, of course, want leaders who are going to be anti-communist.
The rapid transformation of Stalin from Uncle Joe to the Red Soviet menace leaves the Western Allies scrambling for intelligence on their new enemy.
We genuinely felt that the Soviet Union represented a threat to our existence, and ultimately you're going to use whoever you can to gain information about the new enemy.
The US needs help to tackle this new enemy, but who can they turn to?
The only people who have got knowledge of how the communists operate, who've got a determined anti-communist position, are the old Nazis, who are the only people who have the authority and the knowledge to counter the Soviet communist position.
The Nazis' long-standing hatred of communism had led them to gather data files on the Red Army. They know how the communists operate. What is more, they are used to tracking down and infiltrating Soviet intelligence cells. They've been doing it for 15 years, and already have agents in place to spy for them.
They've got a picture of Soviet politics and Soviet decision-making that a lot of people in Britain and America just don't have. That's a sort of a big area of ignorance in the West.
To acquire this vital new intelligence, the Americans need to recruit from the very worst Nazi agencies. They need people from the Gestapo and SS. Amongst those they recruit is former Gestapo officer Klaus Barbie. Barbie was a career Nazi with a brutal streak. As a boy, he had joined the Hitler Youth. Barbie's Nazi career then flourished. Firstly, he joined Hitler's elite SS, perfect specimens of the master race, hand-picked for their hatred of Jews and extreme fanaticism. Before moving into the Gestapo, the Nazis' dreaded secret police.
If you wanted to think of the classic kind of comic book pantomime Gestapo officer, Klaus Barbie's going to fit the bill. He ended up performing absolutely foul acts of brutality on men, women and children in the names of trying to extract information.
At just 29, Barbie is a brutal, sadistic killer who laughs whilst personally torturing and murdering prisoners. In France, he became known as the Butcher of Lyon, actively participating in the worst crime of all, the Holocaust.
This is an absolute prima facie war criminal.
Historians estimate that Barbie was directly responsible for the deaths of up to 14,000 people, including the deportation to Auschwitz of 44 Jewish orphans. But Klaus Barbie has also been specially trained in counter-espionage, skills he's honed, amongst others, on the Russians. These same skills in infiltrating communist networks make him and others like him hugely attractive to the Americans.
You know, the world changes very, very quickly, and what someone like Klaus Barbie is very good at doing is recognising that, you know, the tables have turned.
Despite being near the top of the list of wanted war criminals, when Barbie is finally caught, he is amongst a small group allowed to cut a deal with the Americans.
He's the sort of the ugly face of the Nazi regime. But he knows things, and he has information, and he has contacts that are of use to the West. So without anybody wanting to shout this from the rooftops, he becomes one of those people who the British and then the American intelligence services use as a way in to the Soviet networks in Germany.
For the Americans, at this stage, the ends justify the means. Barbie provides a link between the CIA and his old networks, and the Americans are very pleased with the information he's feeding them.
He is an opportunist. He will go wherever the cash is and whoever is going to save his skin.
But in June 1949, the truth comes out. The man the French had sentenced to death for war crimes is working for the Americans.
By 1950, the writing's on the wall for Barbie's usefulness as an agent, and it's proving very embarrassing to the Americans to have someone who's committed some pretty bestial and heinous acts on their payroll.
But rather than hand him over to be tried for war crimes, US intelligence opts for a conspiracy plan straight out of the Nazi handbook.
What the Americans decide to do is they think they'll send him down what has now become called the rat line.
Operation Ratline is an American-run escape route set up to get rid of embarrassing employees. After being given a new passport and new name by the US, Barbie becomes Klaus Altmann.
The escape lines ran basically through Germany, Austria, and across the Alps into Italy, and then normally out through a port like Genoa.
Within weeks of leaving Germany, he was on board a ship with $5,000 in his pocket, destination South America. It will be 32 years before he is seen in the West again. But in South America, under his new identity, he gets new blood on his hands.
He is one of these people who thrives in dictatorships, and all the way through the 50s and 60s and 70s, he manages to work with various horrible, corrupt regimes. I mean, you know, if there's something shifting going on in Latin America in the 60s and 70s, you can pretty much bet your bottom dollar that Klaus Barbie's involved in it somewhere. He actually makes himself really quite wealthy.
Although cases like Barbie are few and far between, as the years pass, the zeal to pursue Nazis begins to fail. Denazification is officially ended in 1951. Disgusted at how reluctant the authorities have become, increasingly it is down to individuals to take matters into their own hands. These are the Nazi hunters.
The Nazi hunters are an extraordinary and curious phenomenon. These were people who had themselves suffered individually at the hands of the Nazis. There's therefore a sense of personal mission, a mission of justice as much as of retribution.
It devolved to people like Simon Wiesenthal, independent people who tried to hunt down Nazis using limited resources. And really, that just shows you how little there was of a Nazi hunting mentality amongst the Allies. It was sort of, let's forget about it, don't mention the war.
These documents show that Geckis was not only a member of a police battalion which carried out the liquidation of Jews,
But for individuals, the fight continues.
Statements of eyewitnesses.
Former Nazis are meticulously tracked down, even as far afield as South America.
A lot of people are aware of the fact that Klaus Altmann is indeed Klaus Barbie. And among them are these couple of Nazi hunters called Serge and Beate Klarsfeld. And it's Beate Klarsfeld who decides to go to South America and, you know, harangues the Bolivians that they've got Klaus Barbie in their borders.
Thanks to the efforts of the Klarsfelds, Barbie is sensationally returned to France, where he is convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment. He dies in the same Lyon prison where he committed so many vile acts in the 1940s. Although never simple, and at times morally questionable, denazification wasn't a sham. It did succeed. Its best testament is to look at what Germany is like today.
Nazism has not been a significant political force in Germany since 1945.
There's been a sort of massive change in the way that Germany deals with the Third Reich. They are now facing up to their past. With the building of the Holocaust Memorial in Berlin, the opening up of all these concentration camps as memorial sites, poignant memorial sites.
Germany has in fact embraced democracy and pluralism and individual freedoms with a degree of zest and commitment which puts other countries to shame.
Ultimately, denazification did succeed in Germany. Those that had been mind-captured had their eyes opened. The Nazis had used lies and deceit at a time of economic crisis to seduce ordinary people into committing heinous crimes. By seizing power, a small group of criminals were ultimately responsible for the death of over 40 million people. This remains a warning to us all.